In a galaxy where faith is a weapon and gods devour souls, a different kind of myth crashes through the warp. A scarred Spartan who kills gods with his bare hands. What happens when Kratos, the ghost of Sparta, arrives in the 41st millennium? No prophecies, no destiny, just rage, consequence, and a war against the very idea of divinity. The shrine world burned like a cathedral candle left too close to its curtain. Sirens braided with hymns as habs collapsed and stained glass rained down in confessionals of light. On the basilica steps, sisters in scorched plate sang oaths through voxes, while guardsmen fired lines of tracer prayers against a red tide that answered with laughter. Brass-helmed things whose axes butchered the air before they ever found flesh. At the center of the square, reality stretched the way wet leather stretches, and then it tore. Not open like a door, but inward, like a fist punching through a wall from the other side. Chains rattled out first. Then a scarred man followed, bare-armed, ash-pale, eyes like a winter sea. The smell that came with him wasn't the warp's copper rot. It was cold pine and old ash and a memory of snow. Bloodletters took him for sport. They rushed as one. The first lost its arm to a swing that bent the light and left rime steaming from the cut. The second found its neck in a chain, and its head slammed so hard into marble that the tile remembered the impact. The third kept coming until it met a Spartan's knee and learned what the word stop felt like. Kratos learned quickly too. This galaxy was governed by screaming and ceremony. Its gods wore hunger like armor. Its soldiers kept courage in reliquaries and lit it with litanies. He needed neither. He upped the pressure until demons stopped being spectacle and became movement to be answered, rhythm to be broken. When a herald leapt the steps, its blade a banner of hate, he caught it mid-arc with one chain, wrenched it off balance, and buried the Leviathan deep. Cold bit into warp fire and turned it into brittle, shattering glass. Banners fell, bells cracked. The tear behind him puckered shut, as if reality were relieved to be whole again. A rosette flashed. A voice like a law with boots barked through a crowd of terrified survivors. Inquisitorial acolytes fanned out, stormcoats slick with ash, hellguns leveled. Down, they ordered in 6 dialects. Kratos looked from the weapons to the kneeling citizens clutching charms, and back to the demons turning to smoke around his feet. He did not kneel. He wiped red from his beard with the back of his hand and watched the warp stuff disintegrate like frost under sunlight. "Your gods are loud," he said, voice low. "And cowards." Sermon-pure faces bruised with anger. "Arch-Xenos," someone hissed. "Abomination," another corrected. Above them, a Valkyrie screamed by and cut a line of wind through floating ash. A sister of battle at the forefront took off her helm and looked at the man who had walked through a wound in the world and made killing look like carpentry. She made the sign of her faith anyway. He stared at the movement as one would stare at an old scar. The bolters stayed trained. The people whispered saint and demon in the same breath. Kratos rolled his shoulders once and waited for the next enemy to introduce itself. They brought an army to make sure the next introduction was permanent. Rank upon rank of Skitarii clicked into place at the edge of the square. Incense-smogged cog priests muttering scrap code benedictions, while their servo skulls tasted the air. Sisters formed a crimson and ivory wedge around an inquisitor whose vox grace made human words look comfortable in a machine throat. A grey knight appeared like a refusal to be defiled, purity seals snapping in the hot wind. An Astartes captain in battered cobalt plate stepped forward, helm mag-locked, eyes unwavering. The litany of injunctions began. Disarm, submit identification, classification, binding protocols. Kratos heard the meanings and not the words. Kneel, prove you are safe, prove you are less dangerous than our fear of you. He set the axe down, then called it back. The return blurred more than the throw. Metal recognized its master faster than a human eye could blink. An outraged ripple traveled the line like current. Trial by arms, the captain said, saving everyone from a massacre they did not yet know they were organizing. He stepped in with a relic blade that hummed like a trapped thunderstorm and a shield crackling with a small sun inside. Kratos moved like someone who has been hit by gods and expects worse from men. Blades of chaos snaked, testing angles, striking for joints. Sparks leapt and died. The power sword bit his forearm. He gave it flesh to take the captain's balance. The Leviathan came in low, hit the rim of the shield, boomed like a felled tree. Ceramite spider-webbed. Chains hissed, snagged, pulled. The captain disarmed him of one blade and paid for it with 4 fingers. Kratos bled. The captain bled. Both stepped back because both understood the arithmetic of honor and necessity. The Inquisitor made it simple. Serve under sanction as a living weapon against the warp, or be reduced to its component mysteries in a Mechanicus vault. Kratos glanced toward a squad dragging a caged psyker whose eyes had gone inside out. He looked back at the sister who had not stopped aiming at his heart. "I will kill the things behind your prayers," he said, "but not for your throne." The Grey Knight's helm tilted, perhaps fractionally approving, perhaps registering a new problem. Tests followed. The knight spoke words that were not words. Kratos met them with the habit of a mind that had learned long ago not to open its doors to voices pretending to be fathers. The Mechanicus pressed cog-toothed instruments against the Leviathan and heard only interference in machine cant. Someone tried to weigh the blades and found that the scales whispered the weight of regret. He refused their chains and their collars and their sigils. He accepted passage on their ship because that was where the next wars were. In the ship's chapel, he watched men pray to a silent emperor and did not mock them. He only tightened a chain around his wrist and thought of a boy with a bow and a steadier voice than his own. When a minor breach let something with too many teeth wander the lower decks, he met it without a hymn and put it down without ceremony. Word traveled. The Xenos that bleeds like a man, but makes demons blink first. The Ordo Malleus stamped him conditionally tolerable and pointed his rage at a star map, with one region ringed in warning sigils and old fear. The Eye of Terror waited like a dare. They did not go alone. Ildari shards of prophecy fell into their path the way leaves fall into a stream that is always flowing toward a cataract. She came with runes that glowed like embers and a gaze that refused the clumsy weight of human categories. Witch, seer, liar. "Close what your enemies opened," she said, "and I will show you a door that is not a cage." Kratos mistrusted bargains that arrived dressed as mercy. He also mistrusted leaving a thing behind him that would grow while he hunted elsewhere. He boarded a raider that moved more like an animal than a craft, endured the impossible angle of the webway, and stepped out under a sky that had never learned the difference between storm and thought. The eye gnawed at reason. Mountains wandered, Rivers forgot they were water. He tightened his chains again. The Farseer led him to a fortress built of skulls that didn't have the courtesy to be dead, bone that breathed in time with faraway battle drums. Flesh hounds hunted along ridges, noses drinking rage, tongues writing the names of wars in the dust. He met the pack with calculated brutality, baiting the lead and breaking its legs first, then putting the axe between shoulder blades, not because it was dramatic, but because that ended the chase with the fewest extra cuts. Red rain fell upward. The blades carved bruises into the world, and the world yelped. Inside, the Skull Keep's heart was a pulsing anvil. Chains the size of ship masts stretched across an arena where champions had forgotten to lose and start again. A bloodthirster towered above them all. Brass wings, hate made architecture. It roared a name at him, a title other gods had spat with their last teeth. Kratos did not answer to it. He'd learned long ago that names are leashes when spoken by the wrong mouths. He went low, forcing the demon to stoop into human geometry. The axe sank into a knee. The demon learned pain through the lens of leverage. The blades looped, tangled, bit. Each chain, a question the monster answered with a swing wider than a city street. Stone screamed. Kratos found an old principle in a new hell. Weight beats frenzy. He anchored one chain around a black pillar that drank light rather than wore it. The metal vibrated in his hand like a bowed string. The Farseer shouted something about Noctilith. He didn't need the word. He felt what it meant. Immovable to the warp, a refusal forged into matter. He dragged. The demon slammed forward into real. For a heartbeat, it was pinned in the same world as everyone else. That heartbeat was enough. He broke a shard off the black pillar and pressed it into the wound where chain meets blade. The steel sulked. The shard hummed. He fed the forge with effort and hoarse breath instead of fire. When the blades moved again, they made the air around them stubborn. The next time the chain wrapped the demon's wrist, the wrist stayed caught the way a promise stays caught when you make it to a child who can't afford another lie. The axe followed, down through roaring, through old curses that had learned new languages, through bone that had been melted and recast too many times. The bloodthirster tried to be a storm. The blackstone made it weather. It died badly and loudly, and then it tried to be smoke. And then the shard in the chain gave it a worse option. It had to be dead. The Skull Keep trembled. Runes flickered and went out. The fortress began to collapse as if exhausted by centuries of theater suddenly ended. He dragged the shard-studded chains through the keep's arteries, cutting the power of the rift the way a butcher cuts the cords that hold a carcass together. The Farseer's runes spun, frantic, then content. The breach folded and held. The eye still boiled beyond, an ocean offended by the loss of one wave. Kratos stood in the ruin and tested the weight of his weapons. They were heavier now in a way that pleased him, not with magic, with purpose. The seer approached, offered a vision the way a hunter offers water, a path away from thrones and collars toward fights that starve tyrants rather than feed them. He didn't thank her. He nodded once. In another life, gods had made him a lesson about rage. In this one, he would make himself a lesson about refusal. The galaxy howled. He answered by tightening his grip and choosing where to walk next. Terror rose like a memory of power that refused to die. The void docks hung in rings of adamantine and incense. Pilgrim ships drifted like barnacles on a world-sized reliquary. Inside the atmosphere, everything hummed with worship. The air smelled like oil and old prayers. Even the dust seemed to have learned how to kneel. When Kratos disembarked, he did not slow for the view of the palace. Men who had never seen a forest wept at a horizon made of gold. He looked at the mountain of architecture and saw work, countless hands, endless weight. Fear mortared into beauty. The custodes met him the way cliffs meet waves, by existing. Gold taller than titans, eyes like the pause between heartbeats, spears that made the air behave. Their presence pressed on the room like a truth that had been sharpened. They did not posture, and so neither did he. They assessed. The Grey Knight with him offered a dossier dense enough to be used as armor. The Inquisitor, voice varnished, smile carved, presented sanctions and conditions and approvals signed by haunted men who triumphed daily over the urge to burn everything they didn't understand. The custodian who finally spoke did so without threat or comfort. "You have been measured." A pause. "You remain." That might have been welcome. It was not an invitation. He was allowed to walk the outer shadows of the palace, where saints looked down from arches with eyes that knew too much about fire. Ecclesiarchs and cardinals paraded in robes that sounded like coins when they moved. Someone important tried to lay a wreath of light on his shoulders, hollow lilies forming a halo around the head of a man who had murdered gods and outlived coronations. "The Godslayer," the priest intoned, voice trembling with the thrill of naming a miracle, "has come to—" The blades whispered out and back in the same breath, not to shed blood, but to cut the projection at the spine. The halo fell into sparks. Kratos looked at the priest's shaking hands, then at the crowd's bright hunger. "Do not build me," he said, calm and flat. "I tear down what I am set upon." Word traveled faster than ships. In the slums where pilgrims slept in stacked iron honeycombs, they passed a crude chalk sketch of a scarred face and argued about whether a man like that could carry a blessing without becoming a cage. In the palace spine, where strategium floors hummed with the song of 1,000 far wars, faceless advisors argued the math of a weapon that refused ownership. The offer arrived in a place without doors. It was a room of cutting lines, lit by nothing that cast a shadow. A seam in the air flexed open, and a cold that was not about temperature bled out. Not a demonic draft. Not that stink of meat logic turned inside out. Something older, bone-tired, precise. A webway channel quivered like a string plucked by a dying hand. Voices layered until meaning remained after sound had burned away. Will without worship, command without praise. No promises, no bribes. Only a fact set down like a blade on a table. There is a hole in the galaxy where a monster drinks from the faith of a world. The monster loves the taste of the singing most. The map they showed him was not ink. It was pain given geometry. A shrine world named after an old sorrow, where miracles were as common as bread and as necessary. Hospitals cured fevers that should have burned entire cities. Storms broke around the cathedral spires as if pushed back by invisible palms. Children born on its flagstones never begged. The faithful said the emperor smiled there. The Farseer, she had not returned to him, but her runes had a way of arriving early, had called it something else when she traced that star with her fingertip. A spill, a siphon, a wound held open to light 1,000 candles and feed 1,000 teeth. Beneath the basilica, a rift pulsed with caged warp. The miracles were stolen stability, coaxed from the tempest. Everyone who knelt there warmed their hands on a fire that would, given time, become a forge for a demon that already had a name. The custodians did not instruct him. They do not instruct anyone outside their number. They stood in the doorway of a choice and confirmed that it was indeed a doorway. The Inquisitor argued math. 1,000,000 pilgrims dead of curable plagues if the font went dark. Countless more hearts broken when a saint world dimmed. But 1,000,000,000 elsewhere saved, the Grey Knight added, resignation cadencing each syllable. The priest who had tried to halo him reappeared with eyes hollowed by weeks of prayer and no answers. "We cannot be the one to turn it off," the priest said, barely above a whisper. "We cannot be seen to choose despair." Kratos recognized what he had been brought here to be, a knife that institutions could hide behind. It was not new work. He went under the cathedral, the way a man goes under an old house that has shifted and learned to moan at night. Tunnels sweated candle heat. The walls held fingerprints from centuries of faithful hands. Choirs sang above, and the stones carried the music down until it became pressure. The deeper chambers were braced with symbols that had been powerful once and were now furniture. At the last door, a sister barred the way, helm on, eyes steady, rosary rattling against gauntlet. "If you do this, they will say you killed a world." He nodded. She searched for a scripture that would make it an easier sentence. None volunteered. She stepped aside without absolving him. He appreciated that more than blessing. The rift looked like a truth said too loudly in a quiet room. It strobbed, and every flash showed a different cathedral, a different crowd above, a different disease staying its hand. He felt the pull of it trying to be useful, and then trying to demand payment for the use. He could have stood there for a long time and made excuses. He could have decided to be loved. Instead, he set to work. He hammered the blades into the floor in an X around the wound, the chains crossing like tendons around a joint. The Leviathan drank the air until frost furred the stone, until breath came out as ghosts. He had learned in the eye that Blackstone offended the warp. There was none here. But there were bones, relics of men who had died defiant. He broke a reliquary open with a gentle violence and found what he needed. A shard of some impossible craft, a fossil of a vow strong enough to hold shape. He lashed it to a chain. The rift howled without making a sound. With each strike, he chose a memory to anchor the blow. A boy's laughter on a boat, a woman's warning carved into his patience, the taste of mountain air so clean it embarrassed him. He fed the work with those instead of rage. Rage makes openings. He needed closures. The first chain bit, and the light in the chamber shivered. The second caught, and the choir above missed a note in a way that no mortal ear would notice. But the stones did, and they filed it under hurt. He drew the axe up like a judge draws breath before sentence, and brought it down through a century of superstition and a decade of administrative cowardice, and one very active, very hungry line of supply. Miracles died. They did not go quietly. Up in the nave, a woman whose son had not died last winter dropped her candle because she felt, without knowing why, that something had been stolen and returned all at once. In the charity wards, machines hiccuped and slowed, their prayers to function answered with blankness. In the weather towers, Lightning decided it remembered how to strike, and did. Hymns staggered. Faith did not. The faithful cried out, a sound like grief and like birth. When the rift finally sealed, it did so like a wound closed by a surgeon who knows how to stitch but not how to explain scars to children. He stood in the hot dark and listened to the sudden silence, the way a hunter listens after a kill to learn what else moves in the forest. Far away, in a place with no cardinal directions, a demon starved. A plan had depended on this font. A shape the size of a mountain of knives changed its mind about today. In the stratagem halls of fleets that would never know him, probabilities flickered and then favored survival by fractions that mean everything and nothing. He had chosen fewer graves now to avoid a number so large later that it would not fit in a human mouth. When he climbed back to the cathedral floor, there were no cheers. The priest who had begged him not to do it knelt in the aisle, hands open and empty. He did not look betrayed. He looked older, which is to say, he looked like himself. The sister who had let him pass watched him for anger she could use as an excuse to shoot. He gave her none. Outside, the sky had shed its careful serenity. Rain came honest and hard. Pilgrims pressed against the doors, eyes seeking verdicts. Rumors sprinted ahead of facts. Someone screamed the word heretic, and someone else shouted savior, and both sounded embarrassed. A delegation waited on the palace steps when he returned to Terra, censers smoking, parchments ready, words chosen. One offered him a new title that would let the ecclesiarchy explain the unexplainable. Martyr by proxy, they called it, a logic so ornate it could fit in a reliquary. Refuse, he said, before the sentence could bloom. If you need a name, use mine, and keep the weight of your choice. The Inquisitor studied him as if he were a puzzle that wished to remain unsolved. The Grey Knight's helm inclined. It might have been respect, might have been fatigue. The custodian who had spoken once spoke again. It was necessary. It was the closest thing to praise that building would ever emit. At night, if night can be said to exist where light is policy, he walked alone along a balcony where the palace looks out on a city that composes its own catechisms. A beggar below tried to sell a scrap of cloth he claimed was touched by the God-Slayer. Kratos watched a child fish a coin out of a pocket, and then watched her mother stop her hand and say, "Earn your own strength." It was a small thing, almost invisible, the kind of shift no empire records. It pleased him more than the palace. Before leaving, someone, brave or reckless, slipped a small icon into his belt. A tiny wooden man with an axe, carved in loving incompetence. He turned it over in his hand. He walked back to the nave and set it on a sill among candles that now flickered without help. Then he left the way he had come, through corridors lined with victories that had learned to pretend they were lessons. They would call him weapon, monster, example, mistake. They would argue about him behind doors that could keep out air. Let them. He had work that didn't need a choir. The galaxy was still loud with gods. He had chosen the quieter sound he preferred, the one a chain makes when it holds. They painted his face on hab walls with soot and hope, a crude circle for a crown, and 2 lines for the chains, and they lit candles beneath it as if a sketch could ward off hunger. He found the first shrine to himself under a rusted overpass where runoff sang like broken teeth. The people there had nothing but belief, so they spent it on him. He cut the mural in half with one clean pull of a chain and watched their mouths fill with sudden silence. "Don't kneel," he said, voice steady as an anvil. "Stand. If you need a god, you've already lost the fight." Then he showed them the unromantic work that keeps a world alive. How to brace a door with a length of pipe, how to anchor a line against the pull of panic, how to breathe through fear so your hands obey you when the sirens start. He left them with a new ritual. Each morning, break one small, useless idol. Start with the one in your head. Word of the icon breaking traveled faster than the icon making. In hive spires, the Ordo Hereticus stamped his likeness with the ink reserved for dangerous ideas. In gutter alleys, smugglers sold little wooden Kratoses carved by tired fathers with good hands. He bought one, weighed it, and pressed it into a child's palm. "Throw it hard enough to crack a window," he told her, "and learn something about your arm." She laughed and did as she was told. The window understood her immediately. He hunted where belief ate agency. The first trail led to a skull fane on a world that had learned to pronounce anger like grammar. Brass altars drank rage through cuts shaped like prayer. Men went there to be emptied and came back with less room for choice. Khorne's hounds paced the perimeter, noses full of fight. He walked in with his weapons wrapped in scrap cloth, as if in mourning, and unwrapped them in front of the altar, not for theater, but because the gesture helped him measure the size of what he was about to break. When the fleshhounds charged, he did not answer with fury. He answered with weight, chain around pillar, pull with the unhurried cruelty of leverage, let muscle and stone argue until one apologizes. The first dog became a lesson in anatomy taught to its packmates. The second he spared long enough to carry a message back to whatever thing listened at the edge of the world. We do not negotiate. At the altar's heart, he felt the old itch, rage looking for a hand to wear. He did not put it on. He set the Leviathan in the cut where thousands of fists had bled and froze the altar from the inside out. Rage hates to slow. The ice made slowness the law. When the brass cracked, the yelling in the air thinned into ordinary wind. The men who had come to be emptied blinked like sleepers, waking to the realization that their bed is on fire. He showed them the bucket. "Start throwing," he said. They did. On a rot world, mosquitoes wrote scripture on skin, and children laughed because it made the itch feel like company. Nurgle's garden was a cathedral of stubborn life, the kind that forgets dignity and grows anyway. The plague altar there was gentle and monstrous, a bell that told comfort in a voice that wanted you to give up and call it peace. He walked through the fields of swollen fruit that bled sweet stink, and when a great unclean one noticed him and tried to name him son in 100 nurturing tones, he remembered a boy's clear eyes and a woman's firm pity, and he cut the thing's lip off mid-syllable. The demon's flies sobbed around him, fat with stolen futures. He did not shout. He made a small fire at first, resin, cloth, patience, and then he fed it with frost, confusing the air until even the rot had to choose a state. The bell tried to toll him into stillness. He answered with rhythm, strike, rap, anchor, pull, until the bell's song broke into the kind of cough that ends a conversation. He did not cure a planet. He gave it a chance to remember that despair is not a sacrament. In the charity tents, the sisters saw what he had done and did not thank him. They opened more cots. He accepted that as the only praise worth hearing. Slaanesh's cathedral looked like a promise. Velvet corridors that always led to a door you wanted, music that remembered the exact shape of your scars and tuned itself to praise them. He knew the trap. He walked anyway. The first room held a woman with a laugh he had buried. Impossible. And a boy holding a wooden boat with 2 small fingers. Impossible. And a scent like apples in snow. Impossible. He did not test the illusion. He turned his head to deny it the dignity of his eyes and let his hands do the seeing. Chain, pillar, brace, pull. The walls screamed in pleasure at being hurt. The sound insisted that all pain meant attention, and all attention meant worship. He didn't argue. He broke the listening devices that turned human longing into him. He freed the quiet-faced and the loud-eyed and told each the same thing. Your dignity survives you not singing along. Some spat at him, furious to lose their beautiful suffering. Some followed, shivering with the fever of withdrawal from worship. He told them not to replace one addiction with his name. Tzeentch's work was messier. Schemes coiled inside schemes, pages that rewrote themselves when you blinked. On a library world drowned in phosphorescent dust, a demon in the shape of a patient teacher offered him a bargain, a map to his future mistakes in exchange for one freely given regret. He laughed, and the sound startled the books into revealing their spines. I am not a ledger, he said. I owe nothing to prophecy. He used the black shard in his chain like a thorn in the lie. Wrap a shelf, anchor in reel, yank until the floor admits the weight of truth. A lord of change circled, feathers full of secrets. It whispered names for his restraint, fear, denial, fatigue. He did not defend himself. He put the axe where wing meets will and learned, again, that even clever things must obey anatomy. The plan collapsed into puzzles without answers, which is to say it collapsed into peace for people who do not need every future guaranteed. Between these hunts, he moved through the Imperium the way a storm moves through a bureaucracy, inconvenient and undeniable. In one port, he took a job hauling chain on a dock crew because the guild refused to ferry refugees unless someone replaced a broken crane. He repaired the pulley with a length of prayer chain taken from a chapel entrance. The priest who saw him do it sobbed and then laughed and then helped tie knots. On a widow world where the administratum recorded grief in triplicate, he carried a body down a long set of stairs because the lift had been requisitioned for a saint's reliquary, and no one wanted to wait. He did not say a word when the family called him blessed. He left before a crowd could form. Sometimes the Imperium tried to own him. A canoness offered him a sword named after a martyr and a place in a crusade that would make murders look like music. He returned the blade and said, I have already given my life away. I won't give you the receipt. An inquisitor sent a kill team to make example of his disobedience. He disarmed them and sent them back with their gear neatly stacked and a note scratched into a ceramite plate. Spend men better. A custodian stood in a doorway and said nothing for a long time, which in that language is conversation. When he left, the custodian said, You make fewer mistakes when you refuse to be adored. Kratos considered that and replied, You make different ones. Chaos began to tell stories about him the way mortals told stories about chaos. In the warp, whispers floated like oil. The nameless refusal, the man who fed iron to miracles, the chain that bit thought. Bloodletters hesitated for a heart long. Cultists glanced at idols and felt foolish and then angrier for feeling it. A warband captain painted a white line across his face to mock the myth, and in the next boarding action, the line became a handle his killer used to pull him off balance. On a plague barge, a chorus of nurglings tried to sing his shame back at him. He set his jaw and made them listen to work. The sound of boots on a deck paced off for leverage, the scrape of chain over rough steel, the grunt of the body as it obeys a decision. Even demons learn. They learned to hate the sound of decision. He kept finding small statues of himself. He smashed them when he had time. When he didn't, he taught children to do it and paid them with a story about someone they loved who had done a hard thing without applause. In a manufactorum city where cog banners banged against each other like trapped metal birds, the tech priest Margos showed him a machine whose only job was to amplify prayer into a useful frequency. "It is efficient," the Margos said, vox clicking. "It turns faith into measurable output." He put his hand on the casing and felt the hum. "Build for hands," he said, and unbolted the amplifier from the factory floor. "Stop using belief as a fuse." There were failures. On a mining world half buried in its own ash, he underestimated a cult's discipline. They chained themselves to the drilling rigs and sang until the sound drilled into him. He broke the machines and saved the planet's mantle, and still lost too many to the simplicity of surrender. He carried a boy out who had painted his own cheeks with a white ash line. The boy came to in the med bay and spit in his face and called him thief. "You stole our meaning." Kratos wiped the spit away and accepted the verdict. Meaning returns if you keep your hands busy. He left the boy a length of chain and a knot to practice. It was not enough. It was what he had. On a void ship falling sideways through a bad idea, he fought gravity with timing and killed a warlord by fixing himself to the deck with one hook and letting inertia do the rest. He learned that the Leviathan bites differently in vacuum and adjusted the arc by a breath. He learned that the blade's black shard sang most clearly when near real things: rock, bone, vow. He learned to make vows that were too small for any god to eat. Promises to tie a rope before daybreak, to check a door twice, to teach someone whose hands shook how to aim a tool. The small vows built a wall he could lean on when the big ones tried to knock him over. He did not avoid the Aeldari when they found him. The Farseer arrived the way weather arrives, inevitable to anyone with a window. She watched him break a shrine to himself, made by people she called Monker, with a tone that was half pity, half boredom, and she said, "You are an anomaly we can use." He looked past her at a salvage crew, arguing about whether to sell a generator to buy bread, or keep the generator to make bread later. "You are a path I can ignore," he said. She did not take offense. "Every refusal changes the skein," she said. "So does every acceptance." He grunted agreement without agreeing. When he slept, he dreamed less of Olympus and more of stairwells, door frames, rope, pulleys, doors that open because people learned where to push. He dreamed of 1,000 small places where people stopped waiting for permission. He left behind marks that were not sigils. A line carved at shoulder height on a shelter door to remind a frightened adult to stand tall. A notch on a rail at the balance point where a child could hang and learn trust in their grip. A chain link welded wrong on purpose so that someone would notice and fix it and feel their hands wake up. It was petty sorcery, a charm against worship. He knew it would not last. Empires are practical in their cruelty. They will eventually find a way to make use even of refusal, to tax it, to bless it, to sell it back to the poor. Chaos is infinite in its appetite. It will make art from his denials if only to feel them against its teeth. He could not control that. He could only do the work and do it again and teach others to do it in case he fell. On a night without stars in a city that had forgotten it was possible to see them, he stood on a roof and watched people below fix a bridge with wire and will. Someone down there started to sing his name. Another shushed them. He smiled, small, surprised at himself, and left before anyone looked up. He would be called monster, saint, weapon, warning. In a galaxy that feeds on names, he tried to live like a verb. The final image is simple, a chain drawn taut across a widening crack, hands on either end, pull steady, breath even. No trumpets, no halos. Just the choice to hold again until others learn to hold with you. In a universe where gods demand worship and empires demand obedience, the most dangerous story is the one that teaches people to stand without either. If Kratos arrives in Warhammer 40,000, that is the horror the dark learns to whisper about and the hope that refuses to be quiet.